Hello, and welcome to this Q-Coach training video. My name is Jane Simmons, and in this session I will be talking about the practice of self-compassion, specifically why we use it and how we use it in the Q process. And some of what I am sharing with you can be found in the book Self-Compassion, Stop Beating Yourself Up and Leave Insecurity Behind by Dr. Kristin Neff. Dr. Neff has done extensive research on the power of self-compassion, and I'll be sharing some of that research along with her insights in this video. In the Q process, when filling in the worksheets, we are asked in section 2 to move to a place of compassion for that part of ourselves that has shown up for healing. And it can be very easy to overlook this step, to just skim over it and check it off on the worksheet, or to stay on a more intellectual level of understanding, rather than taking the time to actually pause and experience heart-centered self-compassion. Yet, it is vitally important to stop and to take that moment to sink into the feeling of compassion for ourselves before we continue on in the process. And bringing forth this feeling of self-compassion can be deeply nourishing and very healing. It gives us what we needed as a child. It helps us to release the story in order to create a new narrative. And here's the real gift. When we treat ourselves with nurturing compassion, when all parts of ourselves are welcome, then we can stop projecting any of the disowned and repressed and orphaned parts of ourselves onto others. We stop unleashing them onto the world. Self-compassion can help to integrate shadow material as it connects us with our humanity. Einstein said that widening our circle of compassion is the key to embracing all of life, and that circle of compassion needs to include ourselves, even the parts we have previously thought to be unlovable or unacceptable in some way. So what gets in the way? What stops us from feeling self-compassion? When we're dealing with a sense of unworthiness or self-judgment or shame, it can be extremely challenging to find a way to feel compassion for ourselves. We can so often be our own harshest critic. And by judging ourselves, we step into an experience of separation. And as we separate, we essentially isolate ourselves in our own private prison of shame, thinking thoughts like, I don't measure up to others, I'm not good enough, I don't matter, there's something wrong with me. And whenever we are stuck in any of those kinds of limiting beliefs, that's the time to widen our circle of compassion and to include ourselves in it. And that gives us the opportunity to reconnect and, in a sense, become part of humanity again. We let ourselves out of that prison of isolation. And the problem is that self-compassion is not a skill that many of us were taught throughout our lives. In fact, at a very young age, I learned the very opposite, how to judge myself and how to beat myself up. So self-compassion is something we need to learn and practice. So to understand the importance and the healing potential of compassion, it's helpful to explore the dynamics of judgment. Dr. Neff points out that one of the reasons I might judge another person is to feel better about myself. It can be a defensive posture that shows up when I have a belief that I'm unworthy in some way. I mean, what feels better than projecting that unworthiness onto someone else and getting temporary relief from myself? When I believe there's something wrong with me, it feels so much better to instead focus on how there's something wrong with someone else. It creates a chance to momentarily feel superior in some way. Well, with self-judgment, Dr. Neff suggests that it could be a similar dynamic at work. If I judge myself, I can feel superior to that part of me that's being judged. If I believe that everybody else is judging me, well, why not join in the crowd and look down on that part of myself too? Or I might decide that if I judge myself exceptionally harshly, no one else can hurt me any more than I hurt myself. And then I can get even more mileage from this whole experience by beating myself up for beating myself up. The bottom line of all of this behavior is, as Dr. Neff writes, we are incredibly callous when relating to our own inadequacies and we slam the door of our heart in our own face. So whether I'm lost in unworthiness or self-judgment, it stems from the same disconnect. And the healing antidote is to stop slamming the door of our heart on ourselves and bring forth self-compassion. So what does science tell us? Well, it turns out that bringing forth feelings of compassion can reduce anxiety, can reduce depression and shame-based thinking. Research has shown that it deactivates the body's threat system and activates the body's attachment system, which calms the amygdala. Self-compassion has been shown to raise emotional intelligence. It helps deal with stress as it lowers cortisol levels, as it increases heart rate variability. There are many excellent physiological, psychological, and emotional benefits to using self-compassion. But we have to practice. We have to practice in order to receive those benefits. So, how do we do it? When we're in the midst of a painful place, how do we give ourselves compassion? Well, Dr. Neff has provided a short practice that we can use. And the first thing that we do is that we acknowledge that we're suffering. And we do that by internally stating it. This is difficult. And I found this alone to be a very powerful practice to stop and acknowledge what's going on inside of myself. This is suffering. This is difficult. And then, to widen the circle of compassion, we consider that all of humanity suffers. It's part of the human condition. Think back to when you did the exercise in the Q Process workshop, where we say to each other, please have compassion for me when I'm being, and then we read our list of shadow beliefs before we turn the card over to share who we've come here to be. When we do that exercise, please have compassion for me when I'm being this, many people have an insightful moment of seeing that everyone has their painful moments and their shadow beliefs. So that's the second step, seeing that all of humanity has suffered in life. And as we connect up to the fact that everyone has their moments of pain, we realize we're not alone. And this pivotal insight in the healing process helps to dissolve a sense of isolation. It allows a gentle spaciousness to arise. It gives us room to be human instead of stuck in the tightness of self-judgment. And then we offer ourselves kindness, beginning with an affirmative statement that honors the fact that we're not alone, such as, everyone has these painful moments. May I be kind to myself. And then you give yourself compassion and empathy for how hard it is. And here's an observation that came out of Dr. Neff's practice of this process. She realized something. She realized that by responding to our own pain with a sense of kindness, we are essentially creating positive emotions that weren't there a moment earlier. And it's not about squashing the pain, it's not about pushing it away or repressing it. It's about creating a heart-centered spaciousness that can contain all of it. Instead of feeling just embarrassment now, we feel embarrassed and connected to our shared humanity. Instead of feeling just sadness, we feel sad and tender toward ourselves. Instead of feeling just fear, we feel fear and comfort from our own kind nurturing. Within this spaciousness is the prison key. And the more compassion you give yourself, the less dependent you become on others' approval. Now, as she went through this process, Dr. Neff had the empowering realization that she carried with her the key to her freedom, and that hidden within every moment of anguish was the potential for contentment. Pain could actually become the doorway to happiness. So to shine a light on how this process can work, let me describe the experience Dr. Neff writes about when she first discovered the power of this for herself. To set the scene, she was having a terrible day. First of all, her ex-husband had called and told her exactly what he thought of her. Her fiancé was out of town, and before he left, they had had some sort of altercation, so things were very strained between them. Her dissertation deadline was rapidly approaching, and she wasn't ready. In fact, she was in a place of doubting her ability to even do the work, and felt like a fraud. As she puts it, She was rolled up into a tight black ball of insecurity, fear, and self-loathing. So this gives you a feel for what she was experiencing that day as her internal state. And then she remembered self-compassion. She had attended a meditation class earlier that week and had learned about it then, and so she decided this was a very good opportunity to try it out. So she stopped what she was doing and first of all acknowledged what was happening and how hard it was for her. And she asked herself the question, how can I comfort myself right now? How can I care for myself? And I think of this as treating yourself just the same way you might comfort a friend who was in pain and came to you for some support. In that case, you might say to your friend such things as, this is really difficult for you. How can I help? What do you need? I'm here for you. And as she silently comforted herself, she became mindful of her experience, observing every thought, observing every emotion as it arose, not trying to resist it or push it away. She watched each one rise up and then she named it. She named the feelings, she named the sensations, shame, tightness in the throat, pressure, pain in the stomach, heaviness, sinking, fear, heart beating, and she continued to name whatever showed up. And then she gave herself compassion and empathy for how hard it was to feel that way. And as she felt warmth and softness rising up, the tears began to flow. And while she cried, she continued giving herself comfort, using soothing words. It's okay. This is really hard for you. Everyone has these moments. I'm here for you. This will pass. After a while, she began to notice a softening in her throat, the tightness leaving her chest, a feeling of contentment arising, everything just quieting. And then, every time a painful feeling arose again, she would go through this process, feeling and naming the emotions and sensations, giving herself compassion, and using caring self-talk. And she went through this cycle until she suddenly recognized that her predominant experience was no longer unpleasant. Instead of being stuck in pain, she was resting in kindness. And her exciting realization was that the beautiful sensations she was now experiencing were not contingent on things going the way she wanted. They didn't depend on outside circumstances. Instead, as she writes, I realized that my own heart was a deep well I could drink from at any time, and that ironically I would be most likely to remember to drink from that well when things were at their most difficult. Self-compassion is a powerful tool available to us whenever we want to call on it for healing. And what she's describing is exactly the power that we have access to in the Q process. As we give ourselves loving compassion, we are now providing that child within us the love, the protection that he or she needed, and now growth and transformation can take place when that happens. When we judge ourselves, or we find ourselves in a painful place, we now have a process we can implement and practice. And here are the steps. First, we acknowledge where we are by saying, this is difficult. Then we recognize that all of humanity suffers and use an affirmative statement such as, everyone has these kinds of painful moments. May I be kind to myself. Next, we ask the question, how can I comfort myself right now? And then we observe our thoughts and emotions as they arise. We become mindful of and name those feelings and bodily sensations. And then we give ourselves compassion for how hard it is to feel that way. And we continue to allow the process to comfort and soothe whatever shows up using loving, caring self-talk. And we keep going. With every painful emotion that arises, we keep following this practice until it feels complete. And when we stop slamming the door of our hearts in our own faces and instead go to the wellspring of healing that the heart holds for us, we can widen our circle of compassion and awaken from the belief in separation. And as we create new neural pathways from practicing this process again and again and again, now the way can open for us to transform, to step into who we've come here to be. And that's why we consider self-compassion a pivotal component of the Q process. So to help us to develop skill in bringing forth self-compassion, we have a self-compassion exercise that I invite you to please download and complete. You'll find it in this module. And you can share this practice with those that you coach. It can be a powerful, authentic action for them to take, especially if the Q quality that was missing was compassion and or if the need is for self-love. This exercise, when practiced, can help to both develop the quality and to meet the need. So I'll briefly go over the questions and practice now, but to complete this module, please take some time and go through this exercise step by step. And before beginning, take a moment to become heart-centered in appreciation. And once you've done that, now fill in the answers to the questions found in the section entitled, How Self-Compassionate Are You? And these questions are, how do you typically react to yourself and the challenges that you face? What do you criticize yourself for? What are the consequences of being hard on yourself? How does it typically make you feel when you're being hard on yourself? These are all awareness questions that can help us to get clarity on how self-compassionate we are or how self-compassionate we are not. So this can help us to really shine a light on that. Now once you've answered those questions, now you want to choose a time when you were being judgmental toward yourself and write a description of that moment. Perhaps it's a time, it's an embarrassing memory from the past that still can activate a feeling of shame or a sense of inadequacy. As you're writing this out, choose something that actually brought forth a self-judgment. And then answer the question, what meaning have you made up about that experience? What limiting beliefs have you taken on because of it? And there's a list of possibilities included in this exercise to look over and see, is it one of these? It may not be, but there's a list to check over. Take as long as you need to answer these questions before going on, but after you feel complete in writing down your responses, now take some time to go through the practice itself. And in order to do that, we begin by considering the moment that you've written about, and we start to notice the pain of self-judgment. Get a sense of what it feels like and acknowledge it. This is suffering. And then recognize that all of humanity suffers in this way. Write yourself a note of kindness and understanding, acknowledging that everyone feels like this sometimes. And now you want to begin giving yourself compassion. And there are a few ways to do that. I'm going to ask you to try each one and see which one or ones work for you in bringing forth a feeling of self-compassion. One thing you can do is to think of someone in your life that you trust, someone who treats you with love and kindness and acceptance and respect. How would that person respond to what you're saying about yourself? What would that person say to you about your issue? So write down their kind, supportive, loving response, whatever you think that is. Another thing I do that really helps me is that I imagine myself as a child and I comfort that child the same way I would if a young one came to me hurt in some way and needed to be comforted. So I emotionally wrap my arms around my younger self. I tell her how deeply she's loved and cared about and appreciated. I also tell her that she's safe, that I'll never leave her. And if that's difficult for you, you can also just imagine a small child tearfully coming to you for comfort, telling you that someone yelled at them or told them they were stupid or not good enough. Feel your heart open to that child and let the compassion flow. And once it's flowing, now transfer that compassion to your own younger self. Imagine holding him or her in your arms and write down a kind and compassionate message to that younger self, sharing how grateful you are for him or for her. Try each of these activities. See which one or ones work the best for you. Maybe a combination of all of them. Or you might have a different practice that you use that can work for you. Whatever you choose, you want to generate a feeling of compassion for yourself. And if you have trouble bringing forth that feeling, start with appreciation. Start with appreciation. Think of someone you deeply appreciate and let that feeling grow. And then, as it expands, call on compassion to be activated, and appreciation can prime the pump. So whatever process you use to bring forth the feeling of compassion, once it starts to rise up, now you can go on to the next step, which is this. Make a list of authentic actions that demonstrate and activate self-compassion, and add to that list as you come up with things that actually generate a feeling of compassion for yourself. And we have supplied a short list of possibilities, but you want to choose actions that make you feel self-compassion. And then take one of those actions. Notice how it feels. And when you're complete with this exercise, please comment in the discussion section of the Learning Portal. What was your experience of doing the self-compassion exercise? Did you have any insights that you would like to share with the group? What action did you take that helped you? Practicing self-compassion is a powerful process that can be nothing short of life-changing in terms of integrating shadow material. This self-compassion exercise can be a valuable, authentic action to take for you as well as for those that you coach. I cannot overstate the power of self-compassion in healing our lives and helping us to grow into who we have come here to be. And as Q coaches, the more we learn, the more we practice the process, the more we can help those we coach to get the most out of the Q process. Thank you and blessings.